Trash of the Count's Family, Chapter 1, Prologue. When I opened my eyes, I was inside a novel, The Birth of a Hero. The Birth of a Hero was a novel focused on the adventures of the main character Choi Han, a high school boy who was transported to a different dimension from Earth, along with the birth of the numerous heroes of the continent. I became a part of that novel as the trash of the Count's family, the family that oversaw the territory where the first village that Choi Han visits is located. The problem is that Choi Han becomes twisted after that village, and everyone in it are destroyed by assassins. The bigger problem is the fact that this stupid trash who I've become doesn't know about what happened in the village and messes with Choi Han, only to get beaten to a pulp. This is going to be a problem. I feel like something serious has happened to me, but it was worth trying to make this my new life. Chapter 2, When I Opened My Eyes, 1. The man could feel someone gently tapping his body. The rough hand made the man think of the hands of an exhausted parent. It was that warm. "Young master, it is morning." But the voice was very profound. The man felt chills throughout his body, and his eyes subconsciously opened. Rather than the bright sunlight coming through the window to warm the man's eyes, what he saw was an old man standing there with a satisfied expression. It is surprising to see you wake up after a single attempt. Huh? The master wishes to dine with the young master since it has been a while. It looks like it will be possible today. The man could see a mirror past the old man's shoulder. Inside the mirror was a red-haired man who seemed to be confused looking back at him. I guess that guy is me. Young Master Cale? The man turned toward the source of the worried voice to find the old man, who looked like a servant looking toward him. But that concerned man was not the problem. The man clearly heard it. Young Master Cale. It was a familiar name. He slowly blurted out the name. Cale Henituse? The old servant was looking at him like he was looking at his own grandson. Yes, that is your name, young master. I'm guessing you're still a bit drunk. Listening to the concerned response of the old man, the man naturally thought about a name that was even more important than the name Cale Henituse. Beecrox? Are you talking about my son? Chef. Yes, my son is the chef. Do you need him to make something for your hangover? The man felt his surroundings turn dark and he started to feel dizzy. He lowered his head and put it into his hand. Young master, are you still drunk? Should I call the doctor, or will you wash right now? The man looked at the red hair that was falling in front of his face. It was a bright red color, much too different from his original black hair. Cale Henituse. Beecrox's dad, Ron. They were the characters that appeared at the beginning of The Birth of a Hero, the novel the man was reading before he fell asleep last night. He jerked his head up and looked around. He could see the bedroom that was completely different from a typical Korean design. It made the man think about Europe. Every single thing in the room was extremely extravagant and luxurious. Young master? The man responded to Ron, the old man who was pretending to be concerned and worried. Cold water. Excuse me? He needed something to clear his mind. He could see the face of Cale Henituse in the mirror behind old man Ron. Still looks normal. I guess Cale hasn't been beaten to a pulp by the main character just yet. His handsome face caught his attention. The man had become Cale Henituse when he opened his eyes. Cale Henituse, the trash who was beaten to a pulp by the main character in the beginning of The Birth of a Hero. That was who he was. Young master, I presume you will not be bathing in cold water. Are you asking for drinking water? Cale turned his gaze toward Ron. Ron may be pretending to be a benign old man, but he was actually hiding his true identity as a cruel and vicious individual. He made the request to Ron. Please get me some drinking water. He needed to drink some cold water and clear his mind first. I will prepare it right away. Great. Thanks. Ron flinched for a second and had an odd expression on his face, but Cale did not notice it. Ron had to leave the bedroom as there was only warm water in the room. Once he was left alone, Cale got off the bed and headed to the bathroom. If he really was inside of the novel, he knew that there should be a large mirror inside. As expected, the full-body mirror was inside the bathroom. Cale Henituse, who had a lot of interest in his appearance and physique, had this mirror set up in here. Nobody else in the household had such a mirror. The man in the mirror had red hair and a pretty fit body. It wouldn't be wrong to say he had a body that would make any style look good. I really am Cale. The man in the mirror indeed was Cale Henituse from the novel The Birth of a Hero, was very descriptive about each of the characters' appearance. That was why the man had no choice but to agree that he had indeed turned into Cale Henituse. Do people usually become calmer when they are surprised and shocked? Cale, no, Rok Soo, calmly thought about the night before. It was a typical day off. It had been a while since he had read an actual book instead of on his phone. So he went to the library to check out some books. He borrowed the entire series since he planned to read all day long. The name of the book was, of course, The Birth of a Hero. He managed to finish the 5th volume before he fell asleep, but when he woke up, he had turned into Cale Henituse, the individual that the main character mercilessly beat up in Volume 1. Will things go the way they did in the novel? He felt unnaturally calm. Once he got past the point of shock, his mind had calmed back down. He started to remember the contents of Volume 1, The Birth of a Hero. This novel was about the birth of the heroes in the Western and Eastern continents, as well as their trials and growth. The main character was naturally Korean. He was a student who had been transported into the world when he was a freshman in high school. Furthermore, his lifespan became as long as a dragon's lifespan, making him pretty much never age. This is bad? He was going to be beaten into a pulp by such a person. The important thing, however, was that he had not been beaten up just yet. Cale took his eyes off the mirror and walked into the tub that was full of warm water. He leaned against the tub and looked up at the ceiling. It was that expensive marble that was described in the novel. The estate that Cale lived in was actually full of marble. Cale started to mumble as he looked toward the ceiling. It's not like there's much I'll miss. His life as Rok Soo, there really wasn't much to it. He was an orphan and didn't have much money. He also didn't have a person he loved to death, nor a friend who would give his life to save. He only continued to live because he could not die. Yes, he could not die. He completely hated the thought of death or pain. He became an orphan after both of his parents passed away from a car accident when he was little. He didn't like pain or death, no matter what it was, even if he was rolling in a pile of dog shit. It was still better than being dead. For that reason, I need to first make sure I don't get beaten up. Cale did not know what day it was in the novel right now, but he was sure that he had not met with the main character just yet. The reason was simple. I don't have the scar on my side. Cale Henituse, the trash of Count Henituse's family. A few days before meeting the main character, Cale was drinking and causing a ruckus. He was flinging things around and got stabbed on the side by a broken desk leg, resulting in the scar. What an interesting character. He didn't get the scar from fighting someone else. He got it because he got angry that the alcohol didn't taste good and threw a tantrum. He meets the main character after he gets the scar. And after a short discussion, he gets beaten to a pulp. Cale crossed his arms and started to think. He did not know what happened to Cale after getting beaten to a pulp in Volume 1. All he knew was that the main character, Choi Han, has many fateful encounters and overcomes a lot of trials to grow into a hero along with his party members. Thus, the era for him to prove that he is a willing hero will begin. The Rowan Kingdom that Cale currently lives in, as well as many other locations in the eastern and western continents, will be filled with war. It truly will turn into the time for the heroes to show their full potential. Cale started to frown. Rok Soo, the man who became Cale. His life motto was pretty simple: living long without pain and enjoying the small joys of life. Living a peaceful life. As long as I make the story proceed like normal without taking out the fact that I get beaten up, the main character will take care of the rest. For some odd reason, he could recall every single line in the book without any issue. Cale relaxed in the warm water while coming to a final conclusion with his now clear head. It's worth trying. It was worth trying to avoid the continent's war and living peacefully. This trashy situation was much better than when he was Rok Soo. The location of this estate was also in the corner of the western continent, making it an ideal location to avoid the war. In the novel itself, there were many nobles who managed to avoid the influences of war. Even if he could not completely avoid it, he should be able to at least reduce the damages to a minimum. Young master, are you inside the bathroom? He could hear Ron's voice coming from outside. Cale thought about Ron's true identity. Ron was an assassin who crossed over from the eastern continent by sea. He pretended to be a benign old man, but the true Ron was a cruel and merciless man. Yes, I'll be right out. His natural response was to talk informally to the old man. Cale realized what he was doing and made up his mind about what to do in the future. He needed to push that old man to the main character and send him away. That old man could easily kill Cale with a single blow, but treated Cale like a puppy you left alone because you felt bad for it. He was smiling gently. There was not an ounce of care about Cale on the inside. In the novel, Ron leaves with the main character and his son after Choi Han beats Cale to a pulp. Cale put the bathrobe on as he quickly exited the bathroom. Ron was standing there with a smile on his face and a tray with a cup of it on his hands. Young master, here you go. Cale picked up the cup and walked past the old man. He did not want to make eye contact with such a dangerous old man. Great, thanks. Ron's expression turned odd once again, but Cale had already walked past him. Cale took a drink of the cold water as he started to think. There are too many strong people here. In fact, there were too many of them. No matter where the main character went, there were either strong individuals or individuals with hidden secrets. These individuals were both human and other races. I, at least, need the strength to protect myself. In order to live a long life without pain in the continent that will soon be filled with war, you needed a decent level of strength. Of course, you could not be too strong. Then the other complicated things will happen. Cale thought about the different fateful encounters that occurred in the beginning of the parts of the novel, the powers that strengthened the main character and his party members. He was thinking about the ones that would help him live long without pain. There were a couple that came to mind. He just needed to pick one of them. Young master, we will start to dress you now. Oh, right. Thanks. The door soon opened and a couple of servants entered to help Ron dress Cale. Cale did not notice that Ron had a stoic expression unlike his usual self as he looked at the clothes the servants were bringing in. Ah, something simple today. He hated really complicated attires. Simple clothes that let you relax comfortably were the best. Yes, young master. The servant in charge of the attires quickly pulled out some simple clothes, and Cale changed into the simplest of them all. He lightly frowned after finishing getting dressed. Even this simple attire was extremely extravagant and not to his liking. However, the reflection in the mirror was quite handsome. He really is handsome and makes any clothes look good. The face really was the final piece to fashion. He looked in the mirror and fixed his sleeves before turning around to look at Ron. Ron, once again, smiling like a gentle old man. Ron, let's go. Yes, young master. Cale walked behind Ron. It was nice that he did not need to know the layout of the estate. He just needed to follow Ron wherever he needed to go. All of the servants that Cale saw flinched and bowed respectfully before they seemed to run away. Why are they so scared? Cale never hit people. He just liked to drink and play. Sometimes, when he was drunk, he did break things, but that was why he was the trash of the family. He also did not treat people like people, other than the few people he liked. Well, it's better if nobody talks to me. Cale thought about it peacefully. It would be more difficult if he was in the body of a model citizen. A trash can do as they please without worry. It was only possible because there was no desire to live as a model citizen. I will now open the door. Sure. Cale nodded his head toward Ron. The book mentioned that Cale treated Ron, someone who raised him, like he was his own grandson since he was little, as nicely as he treated his own father. It mentioned that he always responded to Ron and treated him like a person. Of course, Ron did not really think that way. That was why it was easy for Cale to talk to Ron. He just needed to answer Ron's questions and treat him like a human being. I hope you enjoy your breakfast. Thanks. Ron, make sure you eat a good meal too. Cale walked past Ron into the dining room. He could see his family sitting there. His father and the current head of the Henituse household, Deruth. Next to him was Cale's stepmother, the Countess, as well as her son and daughter. The four people looked toward Cale. You are late again today. Cale's gaze turned toward his father, who spoke. The Birth of a Hero described Cale's feelings for his father like this. His father was the one person that Cale listened to. The reason the trash did not leave the area and got everything he wanted inside the Count's territory was because of his father, Count Deruth Henituse. But unfortunately, Cale's father was unlike the other strong fathers in this novel. He did not have any special skills or influence. He just had a lot of money. However, Cale liked this a lot. It was the perfect family environment to live a simple life. Then there were the other three individuals. His stepmother, who knew that he did not like her and avoided him. Her smart firstborn, who found it difficult to lead with his much older brother Cale. And the cutest youngest of the family, who avoided her older brother Cale. But it wasn't like Cale bothered them or they bothered Cale. They just treated each other like strangers. Cale thought this was such a great environment to quietly live alone. Take a seat. Yes, father. Cale looked at the feast on the table that did not meet his definition of breakfast and sat down on his seat. He then felt something was odd and lifted his head up. Is there something you need to say, father? No, I do not. Deruth was staring at Cale. The rest of the family was doing the same. Cale made eye contact with each of these family members. They all quickly turned away whenever he made eye contact and continued to eat. I guess they find me really difficult to handle. Cale turned his head toward the table as well. This luxurious feast was different than the breakfast he used to eat just to fill his belly, made him start to smile. He first started by cutting the sausage in half with a knife. It is so juicy. He didn't know if juice flowed out as soon as he cut into it because it was handmade or because it cooked well. But the color on the sausage made him hungry. Cale started to smile without realizing it. Clang! He heard something fall down and made eye contact with his younger brother, Basin. He could see that Basin had dropped the fork in his hand. My apologies. Basin calmly apologized like the personality described for him in the novel. The servant in charge of the meal quickly came over to hand Basin a new fork and picked up the fork on the floor. Watching that made Cale think that it was nice to be a noble before he focused once again on the food in front of him. Cale had found the first good thing about coming into the novel. This breakfast was extremely luxurious and so tasty that his stomach was completely happy. The smile on his face could not disappear. Huh? That was why he did not hear his brother Basin's shocked proclamation. Cale looked around at all of the dishes in front of him. He then moved his fork towards a salad made of fruits that he did not recognize. After filling his stomach with meat, soup, and bread, he wanted to try something new. The fruit looked like an orange, but the color was closer to that of grapes. Cale put the fruit in his mouth and took a bite. In that instant, sweet fruit juice filled his mouth. He really hated sour fruits, so this extremely sweet flavor in his mouth made him subconsciously start to drool. At that moment, he made eye contact with his father, Deruth, who was looking at him. Cale? Deruth quietly called Cale's name before hesitating. He then started to frown and move his mouth. Cale did not like that awkward atmosphere and started to speak. It's delicious. Yes, it tastes like trash, huh? Did you say it's delicious? Yes, everything tastes wonderful. Cale picked up a different fruit this time and smiled after tasting the sweetness in his mouth once again. The trash, Cale Henituse, never cared for etiquette anyways. He probably shouldn't do this while speaking with his father, the head of the household. But whatever. He's just a trash in the first place. It really is best to be the trash. Nobody really cared no matter what he did. As long as he can prevent himself from getting beaten up by the main character, it will be a good life. As Cale expected, nobody criticized his lack of manners. In fact, Deruth actually had a smile on his face as he started to nod his head. Yes, it really is delicious. It is nice to see you enjoying food so much. Deruth really seemed like the only person who cared for Cale. He didn't even seem to care about Cale's lack of manners. Well, a truly caring father should probably try to fix this personality of Cale. But this Cale did not care as he was not the real Cale Henituse. Yes, please make sure you eat a lot as well, father. Basin let another and Cale, who heard it this time, turned his gaze back to the dishes. The 15-year-old Basin, the 3 years younger brother of the Cale that he possessed, was difficult to handle. Unlike the trash Cale, Basin was smart, sincere, and very responsible. The people of the family were pushing for Basin to be the next head of household. Kim Rok Soo agreed with this sentiment even after turning into Cale. Rather than having a complicated life being in charge of this territory, I'd rather use my position as the Count's older brother to laze around and live peacefully in a section of the territory. Cale did not try to argue with Basin. He could hear Basin's gasp of shock and knew that Basin was looking down on him. But what could he do about it? Once Basin becomes the head of the household, his personality was one that he would probably not kill Cale. But in order to not get hurt and quietly move to a small village, he needed to not get on Basin's nerves. If that's not possible, I'll just make some money beforehand and go somewhere that the war will not reach. Cale pretended not to hear Basin's gasp and continued to eat. Once the meal was over, his father, Deruth, was the first to get up. He seemed to have been satisfied with breakfast as his face was filled with a smile. It really was delicious. If breakfast was like this every day, Cale would probably give up some sleep to come eat breakfast all the time. Deruth looked around at the family members who got up after he did, before resting his gaze on his firstborn son, Cale. "Cale, is there anything you need?" Cale was confused at Deruth's sudden gesture, but he decided to honestly answer. "Please give me some money." "Sure. I'll give you a lot." Deruth answered without any hesitation. This really was a well-off family. As a territory that mined for marble and grew grapes for wine, they were overflowing with money right now. "Great. Please give me as much as you can." Cale could feel his two younger siblings looking at him, but there was no need for him to be embarrassed. Wasn't it better to ask for money instead of drinking and causing a ruckus? Furthermore, he needed money to proceed with his plans. That fateful encounter to get himself a strong enough power to keep himself safe. He needed some money in order to cause that fateful encounter to happen. "Sure, I'll give you as much as I can." Cale started to smile after being satisfied with his father's response. However, he was at a loss of words after returning to his chamber and receiving the check from the deputy butler, Hans. The check was issued through a partnership with the Treasury Department, and the Magic Department made Cale's heart run wild. So much money! This family didn't seem to only have a bit of money. In fact, they seemed to have a lot of money. The novel did mention that Cale received a large allowance, but it did not mention the exact amount. However, he could realistically understand how large it was based on the amount listed on the check. 10 million gallon. It is about equivalent to 10 million Korean won. If it is like this, Cale could change his plans. Cale's brain started to quickly think about his options. "I'll be heading out now, young master." The deputy butler delivered the check and bid goodbye, but Cale did not respond. Deputy butler Hans just treated this as normal and headed toward the door. However, he soon stopped moving. It was because Cale had gotten up from his seat and said something to Ron. "Ron, let's go to the study." Hans then became anxious at Cale's words. Ron was the same. "Did you say the study?" Cale found this odd. The sly old man's voice was shaking a bit. Was there a reason he could not go to the study? Yes. He needed to go to the study to form his plan. There were no desks or even paper in his chamber. There were a lot of expensive-looking alcohol bottles, though. "Excuse me, young master." "What is it?" Cale looked toward the anxious-looking deputy butler. "We have not been able to do our morning cleaning of the study just yet." "Is that so? It's fine if it goes that day without cleaning." "No, sir, we cannot let that happen." The deputy butler was extremely pushy about this for some reason. He then smiled brightly and put up a single finger. "Please just wait 1 hour. I'll put my name on the line to make sure that the study is completely clean. Not like a study that has not been used in 10 years, but one that was just used yesterday." "Sure, whatever." He didn't mind waiting an hour. "Great, then I will go report this to the master." "No need to do that, but go ahead if you want to do so." "Yes, young master. I'll be off now." "Okay, sure." Like a well-trained deputy butler, Hans closed the door without making any noise and disappeared. He seemed to be in a rush. Cale knew that there were 3 deputy butlers vying to become the official butler, but that was why Hans was so passionate about it. "Ron?" "Young master?" Why are you blanking out like that? My apologies, young master. No need to apologize. Ron had another odd expression on his face, but Cale put the precious check in his inner pocket as he asked. There was so much going on that he did not even have any time to ask about today's date. What is today's date? This question would seem odd coming from anybody else, but the servant Ron answered in a gentle voice. It is the 29th day of the 3rd month in the 781st year of the Felix calendar. That is a problem. Excuse me? Nothing. Cale tightly clenched on the 10 million gallon in his pocket once more. The only thing he could trust was money. Yesterday, the 28th day of the 3rd month in the 781st year of the Felix calendar. That was the day that the villagers of Harris Village, the village that the main character Choi Han went to after escaping from the Forest of Darkness, the place that Choi Han felt human affection for the first time in this world, made friends, and created a second family, were all murdered by an unknown group of assassins. Even Cale, who had read until the 5th volume, did not know the true identity of the secret organizations that murdered the villagers. Some readers may be saying something like this while reading about this situation. I thought he was really strong. What was Choi Han doing while they were murdered? It is only natural to think like that. However, there is a reason this novel is called The Birth of a Hero, and not The Strength of a Hero, or The War of the Heroes. Birth. It was the story of a person who overcame all sorts of obstacles and carried the pains of his past as he became a hero. Love and friendship comes up along the way as he meets enemies and friends. Something that cannot be missing from a story is the awakening. He may have explosive talents and have lived for tens of years in the Forest of Darkness, but through all of that, Choi Han was still an innocent and gentle person who could not kill another human being. He had no issues killing monsters, but Choi Han had never hurt another person. In order to turn someone like him into a hero, the novel had created a situation for Choi Han. In order to heal the lady who treated him like her own son, Choi Han had gone into the Forest of Darkness to find some precious medicinal herbs. He had to travel deep into the forest to find it, and when he finally managed to find the herb and headed back towards the village, he found the corpses of the murdered villagers, the burning houses, and the assassins who were about to leave. Choi Han went berserk after seeing this and killed someone for the first time. Of course, the people he killed are the members of the secret organization, and this secret organization clashes against Choi Han every so often throughout the novel. Choi Han only returns to normal after killing all of the assassins from the secret organization, before falling into a state of disrepair as he is unable to gather any information from the dead bodies. He then buries the bodies of the villagers before making a promise to himself. I will kill them all. I will kill all of these people that made this happen. Choi Han realized that with the sadness of death was at this moment, but his first kill starts to twist his mind. Of course, he starts to feel again and starts to become more human-like after meeting his party members later in the novel, and grows to become a true hero. Ron? Yes, young master. A cup of cold water, please. I understand. After Ron left and he was alone in the room, Cale covered his face with both of his hands. The problem was that the city that this twisted Choi Han arrives at after leaving Harris Village is a city called Western, located in the center of the Henituse territory. Cale, who happens to run into Choi Han, annoys Choi Han and ends up getting beaten up. This is when Choi Han gets his first subject/party member, the reliable chef, B. Crocs. I was going to head there in advance and help him out. The best scenario to not get beaten up is no longer available. I did care more about potentially saving the people of the village, but there's nothing I can do about it at this point. Now, all that is left is to make sure I act in a way to avoid getting beaten up by the angry Choi Han, who's moving at a crazy speed to arrive at Western City by tomorrow. Avoiding the main character is not a good idea. He needed to run into Choi Han so that Ron and B-Crocs run into him as well. That was the only way for the three of them to leave this place together to start their official journey. Then that left just one course of action. Have them run into each other and then get out of their way, with the best possible first impression, if possible. Young master? Thanks, Ron. Cale took a sip from the cup that Ron brought over. He then started to frown. It's not cold water. It is lemonade. He really is an insidious man. He knows that, just like Rok Soo, the original Cale hates sour things. But he still chose to bring lemonade, which would take more work to prepare than cold water. Cale wanted to be angry at the sour taste, but he could not do so because he was afraid of that assassin old man. He could only drink the lemonade. Thanks, it was wonderful. No problem, young master. We should be able to head to the study soon. Great. Ron's benign and gentle smile caused Cale to have chills. He once again clenched into the 10 million gallon check for support. Money really was the only thing you could trust. Chapter 4. They met. He could not think about anything else while food was in front of him. He could not even prevent the admiration that was flowing out of his mouth. It's so delicious. The deputy butler Hans flinched at the words that came out of Cale's mouth. Cale was sitting alone at the table with Hans standing next to him. Other than breakfast, Count Henituse's family tended to take care of the other meals freely. To be honest, it was mainly because they had each their own responsibilities. Nobody said that it was easy to be a noble, especially if you were in administration or politics. You had to follow a strict schedule, dropping everything else if you received an order from someone above you. Count de Ruth had responsibilities as the lord of the region, making it difficult to share other meals together, while Cale's younger siblings timed their meals based on their studies. The Countess was busy interacting with the wives of the influential households in the region, as well as other tasks. Now that I think about it, Cale put the fork down after suddenly remembering something. Hans started to get nervous, thinking to himself that this was the normal Cale. He was worried because he did not know when that fork may fly towards his face. Cale did not care whether Hans was nervous or not as he got lost in his own thoughts. There was a lot of experts hiding as artists or craftsmen. The Rowan Kingdom was pretty advanced in construction and the arts, especially sculpting. It was because there was a lot of marble in the Rowan Kingdom. Thanks to that, the Henituse region became the 5th best marble mining region, bringing in a lot of money. Furthermore, a mountain range took up most of Count Henituse's region. Even though it was located in the northwest, the mountains were extremely fertile, allowing the residents to grow grapes in between the mountains for wine. Although there was not a large quantity of wine from these fields, it was still treated as one of the best wines in the entire continent. However, Cale's mind was filled more about the strong individuals and not these facts. He'd even missed lunch as he sat in the study thinking about that all day. Why are there so many experts on this stupid land? This isn't the Murim. There are so many hermit experts here like in the Murim. That was why Cale came to the conclusion. Do not mess with just anybody. An average-looking chef could be a poison expert, and the person working in the repair shop could be someone who viciously killed people with his wires. That was the type of land. Sigh. A deep sigh came out of his mouth. He had just completed his plan to prevent himself from dying and living peacefully. Young master, Cale, who wanted to let out another sigh, turned his gaze to the source of the cautious voice. It was the deputy butler Hans. What? Should I get them to make something else? Huh? Hans held back his sigh after seeing Cale frowning and opening his eyes widely. He was thinking that Cale would now flip the table. Hans didn't know why the Count would assign him to take care of Cale, but held back his rising despair as he waited for Cale's response. And Cale did respond. "Why would you remake something this delicious?" "Excuse me?" Cale picked his fork back up and sliced the meat. Dinner was even fancier than breakfast. It was not delicious because he had never had something like this when he was still Kim Rok Soo, but because it was an extravagant taste even for the original Cale. Kim Rok Soo did not know how Cale grew up, but the original Cale had issues with anything that was not fancy. He liked that fact quite a bit. Everybody knew that was the case and only brought the best of the best. Cale put a piece of the well-cooked but still juicy piece of steak in his mouth as he asked Hans. His attitude was one that said he did not care about etiquettes at all. "Hans, who made this meal?" It was the second chef, Beecrox. Cale suddenly lost his appetite. Beecrox. He was clean-cut and was a son of the servant Ron. However, unlike his father, he specialized in the way of the sword and not assassinations. Beecrox was also obsessed with cleanliness and sharpened his spotless blade every day, using that same sword to slice the heads of his enemies off their bodies. He also specializes in torture. That kind of guy ends up admiring Choi Han's sword skill and chooses to follow him. His father Ron makes a deal with Choi Han to help him, and chooses to leave with the two of them for the sake of his son. Although he may not look like it, Ron cherishes his son quite a bit. Cale looked down at the medium rare steak that was slightly pink on the inside and gulped a few times. "I can't allow my blood to shed like this steak." He turned his gaze towards Hans, who was still looking at him before cutting another piece of steak and putting it in his mouth. "It is delicious. He is Ron's son, right? I didn't know he was such a talented chef. I will deliver your message to Chef Beecrox. I'm sure he will be very happy to know that, young master." Cale complimented his cooking. "If that's so, let him know that I truly enjoyed this delicious meal." "Yes, sir." Hans was looking at Cale with a stiff expression, but Cale had made up his mind. He was not going to mess with Beecrox and would work to make a good impression. Cale enjoyed the meal once again with a relaxed heart. Everything will be settled once he made Beecrox run into Choi Han and leave the region. Cale had already made what he thought to be a pretty good plan to make that happen. Just like during breakfast, Cale completely emptied the dishes. He had a satisfied smile on his face as he got up and looked towards Hans. "Hans, why did you suddenly end up being assigned to me?" Hans had mentioned before that dinner that his father, Duruth, had sent him to personally handle Cale's needs. Although Cale did not know about the situation in Count Henituse's family once Choi Han leaves, Hans was extremely skilled and probably had the best chance of all the deputy butlers in becoming the official butler. Hans slightly bowed his head and answered the question. The Count Nim was concerned after hearing that the young master had missed a meal while working in the study and ordered me to make sure that the young master makes sure to eat every meal. As a result, I will be overseeing just the meal-related duties for the young master. To be specific, Hans was responsible for the meals. Is that so? My father did something he didn't need to do. I would eat properly on my own, but I guess I would not have realized it was time for dinner if Hans did not come to tell me. Cale was busy writing down all the fateful encounters in the first 5 volumes of the novel in Korean. After leaving the dining room, Cale smiled towards Hans. "Hans, take good care of me." "Ah, of course. Please take good care of me as well. I will do my best." Hans stumbled a bit as he answered, but Cale just let it be. Cale saw Ron standing there as soon as he opened the door and started to frown. "Ron, didn't I tell you to go eat?" Cale told him to go away because he did not want to see this old man's face. But he would not leave. He just roamed around Cale like a fly. Ron had been waiting outside the door when he was in the study, but even that got on Cale's nerves. "Young master, it is my duty to take care of you." Cale clicked his tongue after seeing Ron smiling at him. He then threw a bit of a tantrum Enough. I don't need it, so go eat. Why don't you go eat even when I tell you to go eat? Don't follow me. You know my temper if you do, right? Cale threatened Ron with his gaze to reinforce that he did not want Ron to follow as he headed back to the study. When he peeked back, Ron was standing there with a stiff expression while Hans was looking towards him with shock. Should I not have thrown a tantrum? Cale was scared of the assassin old man's stiff expression and turned his head back around before speeding back to the study. The desk was completely empty. The document that he had been working so hard on to write in Korean was already burnt in the fire. Cale had done so himself. There was nobody here who knew Korean, but he had to be careful. He had also told all the servants not to enter the study without his permission as well. I remember everything anyways. Rok Soo had always been good at remembering things he enjoyed. Comic books, novels, movies, no matter what it was, as long as he enjoyed it, he was able to remember the names and appearances of the characters. Of course, if he didn't like something, he would not remember anything about it at all. Cale leaned his back onto the chair and thought about what he needed to do in the future. First, I need to see Choi Han tomorrow and do that. The corners of his lips started to slowly rise. I need to pick up a shield. To live long without dying, he had no intentions of fighting. In order to achieve that goal, the first step was raising his defenses. Second was finding a recovery method. Third was being faster than anybody else. And fourth was strength that does not hurt him but can kill others. Of course, the most important thing was to avoid the battlefield or anywhere where there may be bloodshed. Cale thought about these so-called plans of his as he slowly closed his eyes with satisfaction. He was thinking about it even as he fell asleep. At least, I will not be beaten up even when the time comes for it in the novel. The indestructible shield. Cale was thinking about this first shapeless strength he was going to get as he fell asleep. The corners of his lips that had gone up did not seem like they would never come down. Fateful encounters did not have an owner. It was a first come, first served type of deal. The important day, what did he need to do in order to calm his nerves and be successful? Cale thought the first step was to have a hearty breakfast. He felt like the only thing he did after coming to this world was eating, but he was going to enjoy the meal since he will be busy for a while starting tomorrow. I heard you fell asleep in the study last night. It somehow ended up that way. He casually answered his father's question and continued to focus on the food. The fact that he did not even look at his father probably seemed rude, but it was fine since he was known for being the trash. Cale finished eating first and sat up. The screeching noise of the chair made everyone focus on him. I will head out first. It was not proper etiquette, but Cale's father, Ruth, just seemed to like his son no matter what. He looked back and forth at Cale and the empty plates before starting to smile. Sure, go ahead. Thank you. Cale needed to quickly leave because he had a lot of things to do today, but Ruth held him back for a second. You don't need any allowance today. I do need some. This really was a family with a lot of money. Cale held back his smile after hearing that his father will send him the allowance through Hans and left without even saying thank you. He did make eye contact with his brother, Basin, for a moment, but Cale just ignored it and headed toward the dining room door. He saw that Ron was following him and shooed him away. Ron, I'm going out. Don't look for me. Don't look for me. That was Cale's code for letting Ron know that he was leaving the estate that was located near the rear of the city to go drinking. Whenever he did this, Ron just smiled and told him to have a safe trip. Will you not go to the study today? But for some reason, Ron asked a rare question today. Cale started to frown. Ron, I don't think that this is something you need to be curious about. I understand, young master. I will be waiting for you. Cale's forehead started to show even more wrinkles after hearing that Ron will be waiting for him. Don't wait for me. Cale flicked his finger to beckon one of the servants standing at the entrance of the residence over and walked out with him. Cale still seemed angry, so that servant did not say anything as he followed behind Cale. Once he exited the residence, he could see the garden and the gate of the exit farther away. It was only then that Cale let out a sigh and peeked backwards. He could see Ron's stiff expression through the closing door. I'm glad I was able to shake him off. He was glad that Ron did not follow him. However, Cale was afraid of that stiff expression. He was an assassin after all. Cale decided that he will treat Ron better and not making him angry starting the next interaction as he exited the estate. Of course, he was on a carriage. He arrived at his destination a little bit later. Young master, is this the right place? The driver cautiously asked as he opened the door. He then peeked toward the shop in front of him. The driver's face was clearly filled with confusion. Yes, this is it. Cale, who was wearing clothes that would be fancy to others but was the simplest thing in his closet, walked out of the carriage. Nobody was around them, as they had moved away as soon as they saw the carriage with the Count's crest on it. The fragrance of tea with poetry. It was a tea shop that allowed you to read poems while drinking tea. This clean, 3-story building looked to be pretty expensive. It was true that the owner of the shop was very wealthy. In fact, as the bastard son of a concubine of a large merchant guild, he was even wealthier than Cale. The only thing that was that he was living here while hiding that identity. If I recall correctly, the owner goes to the capital around Volume 3 to meet Choi Han there. It is there that he claims that he may be a bastard son of a concubine of the merchant guild, but he will become the owner of the merchant guild. The man who shouts and swears to Choi Han that he will become the owner of the merchant guild. Cale only read the first 5 volumes, and thus did not know if the man ever ended up becoming the owner of that merchant guild, but since he was one of the main character's partners, he will probably succeed. Cale looked toward the driver, who was sweating like a hog, and gave an order. You can leave now. Excuse me? Are you going to make me say the same thing twice? No, do I not need to wait for you, young master? Cale casually answered as he opened the door to the tea shop. Yeah, I'll be here for a while. He could hear the driver's gulp behind him, but a much clearer and pleasurable noise filled Cale's ears. Clang! A quiet but clear bell sound announced Cale's entrance into the tea shop. Cale stood at the entrance and looked around the tea shop. It was still early, and there were not many people there. Cale could see that all of them were shocked to see him there. Well, the novel did say there was nobody in this region who did not know about Cale. He was public enemy number 1 for the merchants because he had a tendency to break everything in their shops. Welcome. The owner of the shop warmly welcomed Cale in. Cale looked toward the baby pig-like man who welcomed him in front from the counter. He must be the owner, the wealthy bastard Billows. His round face and full body definitely looked like a baby pig like the novel described. His charm was his extremely bright smile. He looks like a piggy bank. Cale took out a gold coin and put it on the other counter as he ordered. I plan on staying on the 3rd floor all day today. Bellows stared at Cale with a smile on his face. Cale pretended not to notice as he pointed to the bookshelf. Any tea that is not bitter. Do you have novels here too, or just poem? Clang! The sound of someone putting their teacup down rang through the shop. Cale just thought of it as someone putting the teacup down hard and looked toward Billows. He preferred novels to poems. Of course. We have a lot of novels as well, young Master Cale. Really? Then sign up the most interesting book and a cup of tea. Yes, I understand. Cale's gold coin fell into Billows's chubby hands. Cale turned away as Billows tried to give him change. I'll drink more tea later, so just keep it. But it is still too much, young master. A gold coin was worth 1,000,000 gallon. Having that coin that was worth 1,000,000 Korean won, Cale did something that he had always wanted to try. I have a lot of money. Consider it as your tip. Talking about how rich you are, who cares if Billows actually has more money than he does? He also knew about many fateful encounters that will earn him a lot of money. Cale tried to look cool as he pointed toward the tables on the 1st floor with his chin. Well, if it is too much, you can treat everyone here to a cup of tea on me. Golden Bell. He wanted to do something like this once. After he told his father that he needed allowance, he received 3 gold coins, which were worth a total of 3,000,000 gallon. Young master still. Ugh, enough. Just bring me my tea. It really was good to be trash. Cale did not care about being respectful as he headed up to the 3rd floor. He could hear whispers coming from behind him, but he did not need to care because there were already enough rumors about him, the trash of the Count's family. Just like I thought. There was nobody else on the 3rd floor right now because it was early in the morning. Cale took a seat in the innermost corner of the 3rd floor. He then looked out the window. This is the right spot. The spot where you could best see the northern gate of Western City. Cale planned to watch Choi Han from this location today. Chapter 5. They Met. He gets chased away from the gate early in the morning. Choi Han headed in the direction he remembered hearing about from the villagers after he finished burying all of his beloved villagers. He was heading toward Western City. Choi Han had been transported to this world when he was a freshman in high school, but he had lived here for tens of years already. Of course, the fact that most of that life was spent trying to survive in the Forest of Darkness made him mature in a slightly twisted way, and as such, he was more rational than anybody would expect after such an incident. I need to go report this to the Lord at the castle. Harris Village may have been a remote village, but it was still under Count Henituse's jurisdiction. That was why Choi Han headed to Western City, hoping to at least prepare a small funeral for the villagers. He was also planning on looking for information regarding the assassins he had killed when he had lost his calm, as he was unable to ask them any questions. However, sending the dead off properly came before revenge. If you think about it, he really is an affectionate person, but losing all of the first people who showed him love after tens of years in the Forest of Darkness at once made it possible for Choi Han's mind to not become twisted. In the novel, that was when Cale messes with Choi Han and touches a nerve. He remembered what the Cale novel said to Choi Han. Why should my father care whether or not some useless villagers are dead? This cup of alcohol in my hand is worth more than all of your useless lives combined. Choi Han starts to laugh at Cale's words as he asks back, What an interesting thought. I am very curious to know whether you will change your mind or not. Shall we test it out? That test was beating Cale to a pulp, so that he was almost dead. The amazing thing was that Cale never changed his mind even after he was beaten to a pulp. I'm getting the chills. Cale started to rub his arm after seeing the goosebumps that were developing. He quickly took a sip of the tea that Billows had brought for him. He then looked out the window once again, only to get the chills right back. It's that punk. The moment the gates opened for the morning, a young man wearing clothes with black marks everywhere, such that it made it seem like the clothes were burnt in multiple places, approached the gate. It was Choi Han. Cale did not get up from his seat as he observed Choi Han. His speed was admirable, as he ran like a lunatic through a distance that would normally take a carriage a week to travel. But as a result, he looked like a mess. Of course, the events in the village were responsible for a bit of his messy look as well. The guard blocked Choi Han's path as he walked in with his head down, looking completely exhausted. Cale didn't know what they were saying, but he could see Choi Han shake his head at the guard's question. I'm sure they're asking if he has any identification. The guards of Western City were generally gentle, but very strict when it came to the rules. They replicated their liege, Count Derailing personality. They kicked him out. As expected, Choi Han walked back out of the gate. He did not even throw a fit. After continuously running for a day, his slightly recovered conscience told him not to kill an innocent man. Choi Han will now wait until night time before he stealthily jumps over the city wall to enter. He then runs into Cale, who is busy drinking away. Screech! Since Cale was alone, the sound of the chair being pushed as he stood up sounded pretty loud. He went downstairs and informed Billows, who was at the counter. I'll be back soon. Don't clear my spot." "Yes, young master. I look forward to your return." Cale ignored the smile on Billus's chubby face as he walked out of the tea shop. "He didn't break anything!" Cale could hear someone's voice coming from inside the shop, but he did not care. He needed to set the foundation to earn that indestructible shield today. The indestructible shield. It is not talking about a physical item. The best comparison might be a mage's mana shield, something that does not actually have a physical form. However, it was very different from a mana shield, as it was closer to a superpower than magic. The funny thing was that the human who created the power but ended up dying was someone who served a god but ended up being excommunicated. All sorts of weird things are in this novel. As with the history of any fantasy world, this world also had its ancient history. During that ancient time, neither magic nor weaponry was developed. Instead, it was a society where your own innate talent or talents gathered from supernatural occurrences played a pivotal role. The strongest powers in that society were superpowers, divine powers, and natural forces. It was very primitive. Some of those powers have lasted all the way until now, staying hidden in certain locations or items. It was possible to take these powers for yourself if you met the right conditions. Ancient powers. The heroes would find these powers. However, these powers were all supporting powers, not strong enough to be used as a hero's mainstay. These were the powers that Cale was looking to find. Everything but the divine powers. Whether it be God or angels or devils, Cale did not want to get involved with any of them. That was why Cale was looking for the powers that people naturally developed or came from nature. That is the way to make sure I don't need to put in any effort. Those were the types of powers he was looking for. Something like sword art or magic would require him to put an effort to practice. He did not want to do something like that. Unlike other books, the ancient civilization in the novel The Birth of a Hero was not that strong. As civilization developed, the magic and summoning skills that were developed outshined the natural powers left behind the ancient civilization. Superpowers were the same way. Most subtle superpowers would be blown away by a single hit from the aura that was used in present day. It wasn't like the heroes just used these powers sparingly for no reason. And my goal is to collect these subtle superpowers to become decently strong. It was a satisfying goal, especially because he also knew the ancient power that could strengthen these subtle superpowers. In order to take the first step in his plan, Cale started to look for the ancient power that was hidden in Western City. He knew the requirement to earn that power. Young master, welcome." Cale just nodded his head at the baker, who bowed so low that it looked like his head might touch the ground. To respond, he could hear the baker gasping, but Cale pretended not to hear. He felt bad about how his trash reputation was making this baker so fearful. "Give me some bread." Excuse me?" Cale pointed at all the bread in the bakery and sternly responded, "Everything from here to there." Clang! The gold coin that Cale took out started to spin on the counter. "Pack it all up." The baker seemed to be frozen in place as Cale continued to speak. 2 or 3 more gold coins should be enough for a week's worth of bread, right? The baker's gaze, which had been on the gold coin, moved to Cale. It was too much money to pay for the bread. Cale just stoically responded to the baker's shaking eyes. "I can go somewhere else if you don't want it." "No, it's nothing like that. Young master, I'll pack it as fast as possible." The baker was extremely respectful for a different reason than before as he moved around quickly. After a few minutes, Cale left the bakery with a bag full of bread over his shoulder. Even though it was just bread, it weighed quite a bit. The weight made Cale start to frown, and he ignored the baker who was watching him leave as he stepped into the street. Cale leisurely walked down the street, noticing that anybody who made eye contact with him would quickly turn and walk away. The majority of the people even ran away to avoid eye contact with him. It really is different than Korea. It is truly a fantasy world. Cale looked around as he wandered around this market that gave off the typical fantasy feel. Anytime he made eye contact with a merchant, they became shocked and avoided his gaze. Cale really must have lived up to his title of trash in the past. Cale was talking shit about himself as he walked past the market and toward the western part of Western City. The slum is located to the west. No matter how wealthy a territory may be, there are always going to be poor people. In a situation like this, most people probably expect something along these lines to happen. It is a painful encounter that you can earn by sharing food with the poor. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Cale could feel people peeking at him as soon as he entered the slums. This was the place where both the idlest and the most vicious people lived together. Although the poor might not know the face of their liege, the Count, they knew Cale's face. These people who had nothing needed to pay even closer attention to the type of person that would cause a ruckus in the market, pub, plaza, well, you name it. And Cale has probably caused a ruckus there too. Even though they knew all these stories about Cale, they couldn't resist the sweet smell of the bread in Cale's bag. Cale just ignored all these gazes as he continued to walk. The tip of his expensive leather shoes started to become dirty from the dirty water. An unknown stench also filled Cale's nose, making him naturally start to frown. This made him start to walk even faster. The slums were on one side of a small hill and constituted of old houses. Cale was heading toward the top of that hill. As he got closer, the gazes and steps of the people following him started to lessen as well. Cale's sharp glare probably played a role in this as well. It's better here. After being freed from the stench, Cale stood up at the top of the hill and turned to look down at Western City. Of course, this hill was not as high as the Count's estate. There was no way that they would allow the lord of the territory to live somewhere that was lower than that slums. Cale came back to his senses as he headed toward a tree that was fenced off in all directions. The fence that was made of planks with the width of Cale's body had an entrance that had rotted. It was easily broken once Cale pushed at the fence. This large tree seemed to have lasted for hundreds of years. Trees in the slums were usually chalked into firewood or had its layers peeled off to make it useless. But this tree was not like that. The reason was simple. The reason could be heard in Cale's ear. These two were the only two who had followed him until the end from the slums. You can't approach that tree! Cale ignored that warning. He heard another worried voice as well. You can't go there. It's a man-eating tree. A man-eating tree. Anyone who hung themselves on this tree became mummies overnight. Furthermore, any blood that lands on this tree instantly disappeared. Finally, there was only dirt around this tree. Grass and even weeds were nowhere to be found. This was the tree that Cale was looking for. A long time ago, during ancient times, there was a person who loved food so much that his gluttony in the palace of worship got him kicked up. That person ended up starving to death. This tree is said to have grown on top of his body. That person's grudge and strength were both in this tree. That indestructible shield that Cale was looking for was here. How primitive, mysterious, and strange was this? The majority of the ancient powers were mysterious like this. Cale took a bread out of the bag and carefully observed a hole that was the size of an adult's head. He needed to first send away the owner of that voice before starting his work. However, Cale could even say anything, and the voice was even louder this time as they could no longer see Cale from outside the fence because he crouched down. The voice was shaking quite a bit. You're going to die! Don't do it! Cale pressed his temples with his fingers. The number of people following him decreased the closer he got to the man-eating tree at the top of the hill. However, the owner of that voice continued to follow him. There are always noisy punks no matter where you go. Cale frowned as he turned his head around. When he did, he noticed a girl who seemed to be around 10 years old, holding her younger brother's hand while looking at him. Her eyes were full of concern. Seeing that Cale was frowning and staring at her, the young girl stumbled on her words and started to mumble. It's man-eating tree. You're going to die. I won't die. Cale took 2 breads out of the bag and threw it toward the little girl. It didn't matter if it rolled on the ground because they were all individually wrapped. Take that and get lost. The young boy instantly grabbed the bread, but the young girl was still hesitating in the end. Cale needed to use his identity. He stood up and pushed his head outside of the fence. You two don't know about Cale the trash? The young girl's face turned pale. Her younger brother just looked toward Cale, before picking up the other bread for her sister and started to tug on her arm. Nuna. Uh-huh. The young girl looked back and forth at the tree and Cale, even as she was being pulled. You can't die. Cale clicked his tongue at the young girl, who continued to say that, before making sure nobody else was around as he sat down underneath the tree. Nobody would be able to see what he was doing unless they came right up to the fence. Let's get started. He started by taking a loaf of bread out of the bag and putting it into that hole. His hand soon disappeared into the darkness underneath the tree, and Cale could feel a cold sensation as the bread on his hand disappeared. He felt like his whole hand might be sucked in, and quickly took it out. The darkness in the hole underneath the tree was still the same. If you die with a grudge, you have to resolve that grudge. This man-eating tree wasn't actually a man-eating tree. It was a tree that would eat anything. It was the side effect of the power that was left behind by the person who starved to death. But for such a thing to be related to an ancient strength was comical. But it made it seem more realistic. I remember it said I need to feed it until the darkness disappears. The darkness in the hole underneath the tree was not the result of shade. It was darkness formed by the grudge. It could not be done with other people. One person had to continue to provide a large amount of food until the darkness disappeared. Once the darkness finally disappears, the light was hiding underneath would appear. Once he eats that light, that indestructible shield will become Cale's. Eat all you want. Cale put the opening of the bag into the hole and emptied all the bread into it. In a normal situation, that small hole should have become filled with bread. However, only darkness continued to remain once Cale removed the bag. I guess I'll need about 10 more large bags. The darkness in the hole was slightly fainter than before. 10 bags. Only someone like Cale with 3 million gallons as allowance could casually say such a thing. Brumble. An odd cry seemed to resonate from the tree. It seemed to be saying that it was hungry and asking for more food. Cale felt like the darkness might suddenly reach out and grab him. It is a bit scary. Cale quickly got up. He felt like he should not be here for a long time. Just what can a stupid grudge do? Gluttony was a scary thing. I'll come back tomorrow. Cale said goodbye to the rumbling tree as if it was a person and exited the fenced area. Cale noticed the siblings eating the bread as soon as he entered the slums. For someone who was claiming that he should not go there because it was a man-eating tree, they seemed to be enjoying the breads. They must be liking the flavor because both of them seemed very happy. My. Cale snorted at the siblings before ignoring their gazes. However, their gazes were not on him, but on the bag that was filled with bread earlier, but was now empty. They were probably curious, but what could they do? They couldn't do anything. These children were probably too scared to even go near the man-eating tree. However, it is always good to be on the safe side. It would be bad if they went up to the tree and put their heads into the hole and got eaten. The children of the slums have no fear. It's because they treasured a single grain of rice more than a blade coming their way. Death is always around them, so they do not fear death. They fear being hungry more than death. It was something that was written in The Birth of a Hero. That was why Cale decided to speak to a pair of siblings. If you want to eat bread again tomorrow, don't say a thing. The two siblings did not say anything. They immediately followed Cale's order. The young girl, who seemed hesitant earlier, put her hand on her brother's mouth and pretended not to see Cale. Cale smiled and thought that she was pretty smart as he quickly left the slums. The people in the slums who knew Cale had gone to the top of the hill were looking at him wondering what crazy thing he was doing now. But Cale liked that kind of gaze. The people outside of the slums looked at Cale weirdly as well, but Cale didn't care about these gazes. Ah, young master, you're back. Once Cale returned to the tea shop, Bailiffs greeted him pretty happily. Yes, bring me a new cup of tea. A refreshing one this time. Cale headed back to his seat on the 3rd floor. It should have been pretty busy at this time, but there was nobody else on the 3rd floor. They were all avoiding the trash of the Cale's family. That was why Cale could relax. Here's your tea, young master. I also brought up some desserts. Great, thanks. Cale only continued to look toward the city gate as he took a sip of the tea. Billows observed Cale's face with an odd expression before he quietly left the 3rd floor. It was here to hear Cale thanking someone. Cale continued to order tea and desserts as they looked outside the window until the sky slowly turned orange and the sun set. He only got up when night arrived and it was dark outside. It was now time to go interact with the dangerous dude who would come from the outside the wall.